for the conversation, I'd just like to ask the guest if you could just tell our audience in your own words a little bit about who you are, what you do, and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, John, and I really appreciate the opportunity. And to give you kind of the Reader's Digest of my background is I'm an American citizen, but I was born in a foreign country. I'm half Kuwaiti and half American. You know, my mom's side, she's American. So had the American side of my family in Michigan and the rest in Kuwait. And I actually grew up there for a good part of my life till I was about 15, 16 years old, where I moved to the United States and specifically Michigan. So I had the Arab background growing up in an Arab community in Kuwait, dealt with the Gulf War back in the day. I was about 7 years old, and then moved to Michigan, obviously for high school. From high school, I've always had kind of a large, military part of my family. So that was always a draw to me, especially after seeing the Gulf War in 1990. So I joined the United States Marine Corps. And right when I joined in 2002, as Iraq was kicking off, we'd already invaded Afghanistan, Iraq was kicking off. So I was quite quickly at a very young Marine Corps age sent off to Iraq. And lo and behold, I landed there as an infantryman. That's what I was trained for. But I also spoke Arabic, specifically the Iraqi dialect. So you talk about communication, that was me right off the bat. I remember landing, getting to my unit, and we were in Tikrit, one of Saddam's actually his hometown, and we had overtaken one of his palaces. And this is the first 5 minutes of meeting my unit and the people in charge of me. And I was at the fresh age of 19. They said, well, you speak Arabic, right? I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, we need you down at the checkpoint at the bridge. And within about 10 minutes of landing there, I was on a checkpoint talking to thousands of these Iraqi people there. So that was kind of my first foray into war, into the Marine Corps, and to really getting out there. I did 3 more deployments to Iraq, doing kind of the same thing in different areas. And at the end of all that, I got the awesome opportunity being part of a program called Combat Hunter. And Combat Hunter was what we did, our answer to some of the insurgency tactics where you'd have bad guys hiding amongst a innocent civilian population. We had to get really good at reading nonverbal communication, amongst other things, assess the situation very quickly and make better quality decisions and go, okay, out of all these people in this crowd, this individual or these 2 individuals are the one I need to focus my attention on. That transitioned me in my Marine Corps time, spent a lot of great times flying all over the world, teaching Fleet Marines that skill. But finally, I took it myself after I got out of the Marine Corps and started to apply it to the civilian world, because these nonverbal patterns that you see all over there are just as important to keep safe here, but also has different directions we can go into, clear communication, talking with people in business settings. So it's just a really great frame of reference to go out the world with, especially everyone stuck in their phones nowadays. It's a good frame of reference to be armed with when you're out there in the world. So that was kind of the shotgun version of the background.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so for those of you that may have heard the background and thought, well, gee, I didn't think I was tuning into like a military focused podcast here. Listen, if you listen carefully to what Yousef just said, imagine yourself walking into a meeting, whether it's a presentation, a boardroom meeting, a pitch presentation, whatever it is, and you're not quite sure who the actual decision maker is. Or maybe your intel was a little bit off and you thought the real influencers or decision makers were the person in one seat. But if you have the right tools and the right mindset and you're paying attention and you pick up on the nonverbal cues or the verbal cues, we talk about all of that stuff, right? It's going to tip you off to things that if you don't know what to look for, you could completely miss, right? And it's going to put you, part of the reason that I love having people like Yousef on is that we know that what you guys used worked because it had to work in the high stakes scenarios that you were in. And a lot of times in the business world, we tend to rely on things we read in books or we see in a class, but there's not a lot of, sometimes a lot of real world application behind that. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that you touched on that I'm curious about, you grew up in kind of a different culture. You said you were 15, 16 when you moved to Michigan. I heard you talk on another interview about how growing up in your household that your dad spoke Arabic, your mom spoke English. And so you got a little of, but my version of it was Spanglish.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
we have I don't, there's no word for it, but Arabic has the same thing where you litter Arabic words or you litter English words throughout your communication. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, growing up, it was interesting being in Kuwait, especially after the Gulf War. There was a lot of American and British and Canadian people moving to Kuwait, living there and working for the medical industry, for the military. So you had this intermixing of Americans and British and everybody I just said. So my story is not an uncommon story to have an American mother and a Kuwaiti father, where I would be having a conversation with my mom and my dad. I speak to my mom in English, and she would answer me in English. My dad would jump in and ask me an Arabic question. I'd answer him in Arabic, and they'd speak English. And it was this three-way. And if my friends would come over, had never seen this before, they'd go, "What the heck is going on?"
Yeah.
But that's actually a pretty common thing to see, especially Kuwait. So you got to get real good at picking up, different cultural messages real quick.
So for those of you in the audience, imagine in the increasingly multicultural world that we live and work in, imagine how many people are having these types of conversations in their household that you're not even aware of. All of these cultural influences that are going on, that when we increase our awareness about these things, they start to increase our ability to communicate better with those folks. So how long have you been out of the Marine Corps?
I got out in 2012, spent a little bit of time in the reserve. So I left about 2014. So about 8 years now I've been gone.
About 8 years.
Constantly.
Okay. So you were talking to me before we started recording a little bit about how you're taking your knowledge and your experience from your military background, and you're now starting to translate that into things that are more directly applicable in the business world. I've asked you when we were offline already about a couple of those. Could you give us maybe one or two examples of some of the things like the skills that you teach that would be directly applicable in a business situation that people could just kind of immediately, like when you explained one of them earlier, I just immediately picked up on what the value of that is.
Yeah, absolutely, John. You already nailed it before what you said, the application of what was happening during a wartime. You think wartime business, not really the same thing. Well, in Iraq at the time, a lot of our meetings and a lot of, we called them grip and grins, were over a lot of tribal concerns, tribal things. So you'd have to go into a meeting, just like you said, you'd have to figure out who the stakeholders are. Who am I talking to? Is this person really a decision maker, or is it two people to the left of him? So for example, a acronym that we use, and I still teach to this day, is looking for the made man. You walk into a meeting room and it stands for mimicry, adoration, direction, and entourage. So if I look for mimicry, someone mimicking somebody else in the room, especially if they change their hand position, then you see two or three other people change their hand position to the same thing. Adoration, stopping what you're doing to say hi to someone. Giving direction, I don't even have to use words to give direction. I might just look at you, give you a head nod or point over there, and I see someone, jumping to that direction. That can give me an indicator. Or even having an entourage. An entourage is just one other person. So again, I know I just kind of blasted you with that, but mimicry, adoration, and entourage, if I pick those up, I might be talking to someone that they present you as, hey, this is the leader of our group in a business setting. But when I'm actually getting those made indicators off a person to the left, I go, hey, thanks for chatting. I need to talk to a real decision maker. When it comes to deception, we'd have to filter out different kind of lies, different intelligence lies, different tribal lies. Well, with you in accounting, especially M&A, acquisitions. If you go in there and from what I understand about acquisitions, a lot of it's based in paper, looking through the books, matching the numbers, going through databases and looking at assets. But what about that smaller portion of the M&A that is face-to-face? And I remember reading in a book one time where a gentleman had gone in there. He was kind of a nonverbal guy, and he'd gone in there to help his friend out who was finishing this M&A deal. And he walked into an office building, and it was a buzz. It was just a couple hundred people on this office floor, people all over the place, and looked real busy. They get done with a meeting. He was getting some deceptive indicators off the other CEO, and he's like, oh, that's really weird. So as he walks out, he's now more attuned. Something's going on. He starts kind of looking over the floor, and he sees one person that doesn't fit the baseline. He's not making any value judgments, but this person had a lot of jewelry on, jewelry in the nose and whatnot. It just didn't fit. He didn't care. And he decided to strike up a conversation. and you just go and tap her on the shoulder. Hey, how you doing? How do you like working here? She's like, oh, it's fine. Goes, how long you been working here? She's like, oh, a little bit. And he goes, what do you do here? And she puts down her paperwork and goes, you know what? I'll be honest with you. They offered me this job yesterday. They bust us all in here on a bus this morning. They're going to pay me $100 to sit here and act like I'm working. And he goes, how many other people were on the bus with you? And she goes, about 70 or 80 people. So basically that entire floor was brought in to make it look like this bustling thing. And sure enough, they did a little more digging and they were basically insolvent and they backed out of the deal. So that's just a real quick example of understanding nonverbals, who is in what position, that can save you even in the accounting world and business.
Yeah, you reminded me, I used to work in M&A, and way back in the day, I worked at AutoNation where we were buying car dealerships. Mm-hmm. And I wish back then some of the executives had some of this knowledge that you're talking about, because they ended up making multi-million-dollar purchases of these car dealerships, not realizing that there was such a culture clash. These were car dealers who were multimillionaires who had been working in third, fourth generation businesses where they had all the money, they had all the toys, and then they got bought out and they wanted these guys to come to corporate and sit in these corporate meetings and do these big planning meetings all day. And these guys were used to walking out in the heart of the dealership and dealing in the operations day to day.
On the floor.
And if these guys at corporate would just have had some of these tools to pick up on some of the I'm sure these guys were oozing body language. Oh, yeah. Like that's where they wanted. It's like taking a rancher and bringing him into an office, right? It's just it's a different world.
And if you would have just done a little bit more diligence on the nonverbal side, how much heartache and money could that have saved in a big M&A deal like that?
Yep. You use the word that I know in your business is a big keystone, which is baseline. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, just the general concept of baseline and what you do, and then how somebody would quickly apply that with their awareness?
Absolutely, John. So before I talk about baseline, let me back up one step and give you kind of the acronym not the acronym, but the saying we use. It's the God we pray to, and that's the left of bang mentality or the left of bang mindset. Some industries use it, kind of started in defense, but what we use it as think of an incident timeline where you have bang right there in the middle. Bang is that situation you want to avoid. For us in the military and law enforcement or security, that's like the bomb, the shooting, the mugging. In a business environment, that's a fraudulent, transaction. That's a bad M&A deal. That's a culture clash. So whatever you're worried about, that's bang right there in the middle. And you have all these things that happen after bang or right of bang that are all in reaction to. If something bad happens, we're going to do this. If this happens, we're going to do this. And you have to understand how to react to those events that are right of bang. But if you just spend a little bit of time in education looking at left of bang indicators, pre-event indicators, they're just little wickets that you can look at and observe before that bang incident happens and pull on them, and you can disrupt bad things from happening. So great mindset, but how do we do that? The only way you can really do that and look for those left of bang indicators is establish baselines and proactively hunt for anomalies, basically. So a baseline is what should be. Anything, you can baseline anything, a person, place, a thing. What should be? What is the norm in this area? If I walk into a Starbucks or an office cafeteria, what should people generally be dressed as? What should the volume be in this business setting in this cafeteria? What's the speed of movement? What are the group sizes? What are the demographics? You can baseline everything. So you're establishing what the norm should be. And let's say you walked into a business cafeteria and you did that at 9 a.m. on a Monday. You don't want to just go, all right, there's my baseline and lock it in, because baselines shift as the day goes on, different time frames. So you want to do this multiple times. You're always checking your baseline over your past interactions. And then once you've established a good baseline on a person, a place, an event, now we can start hunting for those anomalies, those deviations from the baseline. And an anomaly doesn't have to be some type of high threat, like someone bringing a gun on campus. That can be one. But let me give you an example of, maybe you have Sharon. She's in the office setting. Sharon's really jovial. She's really loud. You can always hear her laughing down the hallway in her cubicle, telling stories or whatnot. You've established a baseline over Sharon over a decent amount of time. And then the one day you don't hear her laughing, you don't hear her loud, boisterous voice, and you're like, oh, maybe she took a day off, and you notice her sitting in her office area, hunched over a computer, not saying anything, that's definitely a deviation from the baseline. And as a leader, as a manager, or just a coworker, all it takes sometimes is a tap on the shoulder to walk up to Sharon and go, hey, Sharon, how's your day going? And she might look at you and go, you know what? It's not great, blah, 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 blah. And with what you just did, tapping them on the shoulder, you engaged them, you disrupt that chain of events, you made them feel like, hey, somebody else is looking out for my welfare. I'm not just a cog in the machine. And potentially you could have disrupted a chain of events that were going to happen if no one contacted or no one got better. You know, it could have been a workplace violence. So that is how I explain baseline and anomaly.
So one of the words that you said is something that I try to weave into as much training as I can as early as possible, which is mindset, right? Everything that you're talking about, that left of bang, is a mindset that if we get ourselves in the mindset properly from the beginning, we can, some of the stuff that you've talked about, and I've heard you talk about this in other places, if you just get yourself in the right mindset and you observe some of the right things, it's almost like having a cheat code.
Yes.
It can get us so much further down the road if we just go in with the right mindset than if we're just waiting for things to happen and reacting afterwards and then hoping to play catch up.
Absolutely.
So the left of bang mindset, I love that. I love, and I'll go back, I'll put some of this stuff in the notes. The acronyms are great. You have no idea how much.
It's a military, it's Marine Corps, my friend.
But accounting and finance is very similar to that, right?
Okay,
We have acronyms for everything.
That's good. Birds of a feather.
Yeah, acronyms and frameworks, we're very good with that. Checklists, all kinds of stuff. Like, I know you guys, one of the things I stole that we do it a lot in the civilian world, but we just don't have the terminology that you guys use, the after action reports.
Yep.
We do, when I was a financial advisor for about 6 years, and every time we would do an appointment when I was training a new person, we do what is essentially an after action report after the appointment. We go sit down, grab a cup of coffee. Hey, what went well? What didn't go well? What did we learn? What could we do different? And again, I think that's another mindset. That's a good thing to get into after you go into that big presentation or that big meeting. Come back out of there and debrief. What was the outcome? Maybe we went in and presented a report and we made some recommendations. Maybe they didn't land properly. You know, maybe we were a little off in our presentation. Let's have the mindset to address it immediately instead of waiting till a week later to get some feedback from somebody else. And then we can kind of get ahead of that thing.
Absolutely, John. And can I add to that too is,
Absolutely.
you know, the military, the Marine Corps were real good at after action reports, and you need to do them. That's the institutional knowledge, everything you just mentioned. But what I learned in business, and it served me very well, is you have to have that after action component. But I do, you know, basically what's called a pre-autopsy, a pre-mortem, if you could call it. So let's say you're setting up a campaign, or you're going to go into a meeting, you're going to pitch a potential client. You get the plan, everyone knows their job, everyone knows what we're going to do. And right before you step off, you ask everyone, okay, how are we going to fail? How are we going to crash and burn? What's going to go wrong here? And then ideation starts. Well, if I present this part and this person asks this question and we say this, that could really be bad. So this is a whole left of bang mindset for business, doing a pre-autopsy where you could fail. It's not going to save you 100% of the time, but you'd be very surprised. I've been very surprised over how some one minuscule moment of ideation, people start bringing things up, and you identify this huge glaring problem that, you know, would have been a train wreck. So that's another part of do the after action, but do a pre-autopsy too.
I like that. I've taught something similar, but the way you said it was much more concise. I typically have explained it like, I try to think of myself going into any meeting or presentation like a lawyer going into court, and trying to think of everything that could possibly go wrong and then prepare for every contingency. And I don't walk in and just dump it all out on the table. I have it available.
It's decision points. It's like pick your own adventure.
If I think they might ask about what if these 3 to 5 things go wrong, I'm going to think through those, work through those, maybe have some scenarios prepared, some recommendations, suggestions, contingencies, but I'm going to go in with my plan and just have those at the ready. But I think the way you said it was a lot more concise way of putting that. So one of the other pieces of the framework that I talk about a lot is listening. And it sounds like one of the things that is unique about your approach is a lot of that listening is not just the verbal listening, but observation as well.
Absolutely.
So you talked about establishing the baseline, doing multiple baseline, I guess, like different times of the day, maybe different situations. Are there any particular listening or observation tips that are things that are easy for someone to kind of add to their toolkit?
This is something we learned in the military. Actually, I didn't learn this in the business sense, but obviously there's a huge component of communication is the verbal, but obviously the bigger component is nonverbal. So you definitely want to listen to the verbal. You want to hear their answers and how they're presenting that verbal, but you also have to do the nonverbal. What we found out is it's very hard for one person to do all that. It's very hard for someone to be having a conversation or having a meeting, listening to how they're telling me the nonverbal or the verbals and the nonverbals at the same time. So the best thing I could tell you is bring a buddy, bring a friend, and go, okay, I'm going to be the one talking. So I'm going to worry about the verbals, the storyline, what they're telling me. I want you to watch what they're doing non-verbally. And you go back and you confer, and you never just jump to a conclusion, especially in the middle of a meeting. You go back and you get with your advisors and you sit down and go, okay, what did you think? Well, you know what? At this point in the conversation, everything was great, but you brought up this one question and everything started to go a little bit uncomfortable. So that's the best thing to do. Is don't try to take it in all on your own. Your brain can only analyze a certain amount of information all the time, and realize that sometimes nonverbals can be subjective. It's not always going to be objective. There's a lot of things happening in the brain at the time. I don't do a lot of social, I guess what you would call a social or celebrity kind of like, hey, how do these people look when they're at the wedding? I don't do that because it strays away from the survival mechanisms of the brain. When it's survival, it's pretty cut and dry, but the farther away from that gets a little bit more subjective. So just remember, bring a partner and understand that it's subjective when you're listening.
Yeah, that's great advice. There's one of the books that I've referred to a lot as a book called Never Split the Difference, written by Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator.
Great book. Yeah.
He has talked about how on one of the scenarios, a story that he was an intimate part of a negotiation where they had 7 FBI guys on one call, each with a very specific assignment of what they were listening for.
That's great.
Right.
That's awesome.
Now, obviously, every meeting we go into doesn't have the high stakes of a life and death FBI hostage negotiation. We don't need to, have all those resources, but the same idea applies.
You apply the mindset. You apply the
mindset. And if it's a big meeting, maybe you bring a buddy, maybe 2 buddies, and maybe you do have that as part of your premortem, maybe assign 1 or 2 people, the different things to pay specific attention to. And again, going into it with the right mindset sets us up for success rather than coming back afterwards going, God, I noticed this thing. I wish I would have been paying more attention. Be a little more intentional on the front end.
And take that and apply it to, John, what's the average, cost or price tag on one M&A deal, on a good enterprise M&A deal?
Oh, geez.
Whatever that range is, it's in the millions. So think about what resources you're bringing to bear, and specifically in the M&A situation. It's like you talk, well, we'd never have the 7 people. Well, maybe you would if it was $100 million deal or $200 million deal,
I'll tell you what, we used to joke all the time that the size deals we were working on, my salary was a rounding error.
Yeah, drop in the bucket.
Like you would have had to change the spreadsheet decimal count to go out like 5 or 6 places for my salary to even factor into a calculation.
That's huge.
That's how big the numbers we're talking about. So, so you mentioned something that nonverbals can be subjective, and I'm curious. One of the things that we talk about increasingly now, especially with so many people working remotely and virtually, we have a lot more people dealing with people from different cultures. And that could be cultures within the United States. I live in Charlotte, North Carolina, but I grew up in South Florida. I was a military brat, so I've moved 20-something times. So I know there's lots of cultural differences that can affect how we should be interpreting things people are saying. And I'm wondering, are there any sort of rules of thumb or ways that frameworks that you use to help assess some kind of a quick cultural assessment or assessment in general to get a quick read on someone? Like I know, for example, some guys have talked about Myers-Briggs or DISC assessments, and just, once you get a little bit of experience under your belt, you can kind of quickly through observation start to see some tendencies in people's personalities. Are there any of those assessments that you've used in the past?
So Myers-Briggs, know all of them, but again, I work in the more of the real time, being in the meeting, face-to-face observe. So those are awesome tools that you should definitely bring to bear. And I know a lot of sales organizations and sales management definitely use those. And there's different ones, not just the Myers-Briggs, the 4 lenses. There's ways to assess, and they have a lot of success with those. But with the real time, the one thing you can do is sustained observation. So you're never going to really know about someone's culture or their background. They could be from a different country, a different county, a different background. There's no one who's an expert, maybe Dr. Paul Ekman or, Dr. David Matsumoto, some of those people maybe who have triple PhDs in it, but you're never going to be able to gather all the information. So when you're engaging with someone, do some sustained observation of what they're giving you. What are they presenting? Do they look comfortable? Are they open? Because there are some kind of hardwired behaviors that we have no matter where you go in the world. We all have a brain. We all have, levels of discomfort. So you can look for that. Look for discomfort or comfortability. And also, be easy on the colloquialisms, be easy on the acronyms, especially if you're not sure of their background. And what I really like to do, especially if you're in a meeting and maybe it's a round robin, only, you might only get a couple questions out of each person. Listen to try to find out, obviously listen to what they're saying, listen to what they care about. Within the meeting, if you're having with someone and they're bringing certain points up, maybe they only have a chance to ask 1 or 2 questions. What do they care about? What do they come to this meeting? What is the top of their agenda? And then you build a little rapport, maybe a little empathy. You can understand where that person's coming from, regardless of their culture. So depending on where they're from and whatnot, if I'm hearing certain things, it's like, all right, this person really cares about this subject right here. So if I want to build that bridge, I'm going to address that and watch them perk up a little bit.
Great points. So you made me think about something that's been, especially obviously since the pandemic, been a bigger issue, but it still continues to be as more people are working remotely and virtually. Are there any advice that you could offer when we're operating in these virtual or hybrid environments where we don't have the luxury of being in the room, like you and I right now, can kind of see each other from like torso up. And so we're missing a lot of the other body language we might see. We have the luxury, there's only 2 of us on the screen, so we can see each other's entire face and we can observe each other's eyes and our facial movement. When we're in a group setting, especially like on a Zoom or Teams or whatever it is, we start to lose a little bit of the clarity in picking up some of those things. Is there any advice that you could offer in any of the virtual settings that might be helpful?
Sure. Yeah. We've developed these certain mannerisms now because of Zoom, socially, not just Zoom, but using our phones and texting. People, don't really socialize and hang out. They meet each other online and they also, we develop certain mannerisms of what we wear and how we act only while we're online. So this isn't going to work for everyone, but if you have the ability to, maybe everyone in your position is remote right now, but if you're in the same geographic location, try to get people together, a pizza party, take people out to dinner once in a while to meet the real person. This doesn't apply to exactly what he was talking about, but Lieutenant Colonel Grossman, he's read a few books on the military and some of the stuff happening there. He called it mechanical distance. And again, he was applying it to something else, but we can apply it here in mechanical distance. The more mechanical distance you have, the less you humanize, the less you connect with each other. So even if you are remote, try to get together and meet the real person every once in a while. Again, that's not going to be possible for international positions or whatnot, but that can break down some of the barriers because who you see on screen, we've prepared this, haven't we, John? We've got our face on, we've got our hair, we've got our background taken care of. We're making sure everything sounds and looks good. That's a prepared presentation. So it's good to break that barrier and meet the person.
Yeah, you made 2 great points that I want to just sort of re-emphasize. One is almost every person that I've had on the show, I've asked them about this, and the answer is universally similar, which is, yeah, I can give you some tips, but the reality is nothing replaces face-to-face.
Nope. Nope.
So we need to still be making every effort that we can to somehow supplement this virtual with as much of the face-to-face as we can.
Absolutely.
You mentioned mechanical distance, and there's a book written by a Harvard professor named Dr. Sadal Neely called Remote Work Revolution. And in that book, she talks about how the term social distance, as we've heard it in the news, has actually been kind of bastardized. Because the term social distance was never, sociologists have been using that for decades, not meaning standing 6 feet apart, but meaning the emotional distance between
Interesting.
people.
Very interesting.
And so that mechanical distance you're talking about is actually, it's been serving as a proxy for that social distance, because as our mechanical distance, our physical proximity starts to get more separated, we don't have the opportunities for those sort of informal conversations at the water cooler, in the hallway, as we're passing each other before the official start of the meeting. We log into Zoom, we come on, and whoever's running the meeting, they're just going right into the agenda typically.
Absolutely.
Right? And so it's interesting how some of the most basic things, if we just, again, back to the mindset, if we just stop and get a little bit of a reset, think about our mindset before we go into these things, we can set ourselves up again for success. One of the things, it's kind of been sprinkled in throughout everything you've been talking about. One of the terms that I like to talk about with communication is empathy. That book that I talked about that Chris Voss wrote, he talks about a distinction between what he refers to as tactical empathy, or what a psychologist would refer to as cognitive empathy, versus emotional empathy. Meaning, I'm not concerned so much with connecting with the person on an emotional level necessarily, right? If it's a business conversation, my primary concern is understanding where are they coming from, right? And so in the context of what you do, it sounds like there's a lot of what you're looking for and what you're doing that is identifying those points where we can find that empathy of, I'm seeing or I'm hearing something that's giving me a cue or a clue of, you mentioned it, what's important to that person? What are the words they're using? How are they emphasizing those things?
Absolutely.
So any other specific things on that empathy that you would look for in terms of specific body language cues?
Yeah, this is one I stole from law enforcement, and I use it all the time, and it applies directly to business settings, especially nowadays with the what we just talked about, the mechanical distance and whatnot, is empathizing with someone. And this is law enforcement. So this was in context of, you're stopping someone and they're getting visibly very angry with you, and it might turn into a confrontation, but you can apply this in any business setting. Is just know if you're dealing with someone who's maybe being a pain, maybe they're getting loud, or they're butting heads with you, understand that you might be running into this person on a very bad day in their life. With law enforcement, they use it because, you only call the police and then it's really bad. So these cops are seeing people on the worst days of their lives, and you have to understand that. So understand that if you're getting a lot of flack, or you're butting heads from that person, going, wait a minute, is this coming from what I've done or our interactions? Or does this person have 9 other things happening in their life? And if you can do that and reset, it calms you down a little bit and takes your ego out a little bit. It allows you to understand the situation, or try to understand the situation. We can't appease everybody, but it can help you definitely get your emotions under control and understand the situation. Going back to listening to what people care about, if it's a non-business situation, or maybe it's before the meeting, there's poker players that do this. So the poker game is going to be the stressful environment where we're looking for tells and we're looking for people to give away. But a professional, really smart poker player is talking to his other players before the game even starts. And they're talking about innocuous, non-stressful subjects. Did you watch the game tonight? Who you root for the Super Bowl? Hey, I heard your kids are in gymnastics. And look, you can drop these little kind of yellow canaries and see where the person perks up. They didn't care about the football game. They didn't care about the Super Bowl, but you mentioned their kid being gymnastics, and they go, oh, let me show you my phone. And they start whipping out pictures, and they get animated, and now they're up and they're interested. Boom, there it is. That's what that person's interested in. So if you want to dig a little bit deeper on that, you're going to build some rapport and empathize with that person a little bit better. And it just builds a better connection right there.
Yeah, and you just hit on actually the last one that I was going to ask you about, which no surprise, it just kind of dovetailed right into it, that rapport,
Mhm.
that finding those things that are important to them and then connecting on some level
Yep.
with them. Um, so I want to respect your time. We've got just a few more minutes here. I want to talk a little bit specifically about. I've kind of been a little bit selfish with my questions,
Yeah, no
trying
worries.
to
Great
get some
questions.
stuff out of you that's specific to what my audience probably is dealing with and looking for. Tell me a little bit about who are some of the types of businesses and clients that you currently work with? What types of specific courses and programs do you have that you help people with?
Absolutely. So it shifts a lot. I still do law enforcement and military training, but now the big ones lately have been the hospitality and casino industry right now. There are people, especially where the casinos adding hotels to their casino, where you might have a situation where had a very high security structure before because it's a casino floor. I can tell you no bags, no this, no that. You can't stand around. You can't do that. But then you add a hospitality section to it, and you add a hotel. Now it turns into customer service. Now everybody's bringing a bag into the facility. So things have to change a little bit. You had a lot of nonverbal communication. Obviously, the security realm, executive protection, but also healthcare too. Healthcare and specifically nursing. Those frontline staff and nursing and healthcare, there's a lot more dangerous jobs out there, like firemen or whatever it is. But nursing is actually one of the most injurious jobs in 2023 right now. They're getting injured all the time. Yeah. So if I can teach the staff, like the frontline staff, the person at the phone, the security guard, to build a defense in depth where we can identify where it's not just a nurse by herself in a room going, oh, I think this guy's going to be a problem, or this person's going to be a problem. But down the chain, we've talked to them. We've had interaction with them. We tried to build a real rapport. And maybe you have two or three go, hey, wait a minute, we need to pay attention. We're not going to let this person in a room by themselves. So those are the industries I'm seeing big in right now. And some sales, actually, too. Sales organizations want more of the nonverbal communication. And John, you've done a great job of kind of translating this for the audience. But I will say, where I was doing it for the military on deployments, looking for car bombs and threats and all these crazy, the biggest thing you could do, or the best thing you could do, is it basically, dials down to looking for discomfort, how uncomfortable someone is. So someone might be smuggling a weapon system or doing something very nefarious. They're going to have high level fear responses from that brain. There's dopamine, there's cortisol, there's, all these things getting dumped into the body that's going to show you this person's uncomfortable. In a business setting or an employment setting, it's the same thing. It's the same chemicals. The brain feels like it's under threat. If I'm lying about something or being deceptive in an M&A deal, your brain doesn't feel good about that. Your brain understands that you're lying, so you're not in a good situation. So it starts firing off cues. So they might not be as high level as, a bad guy, an insurgent or whatever it is, but they're still going to be there. So looking for discomfort when people are pulling in or pushing back can give you a lot of information about that situation.
Yep. Yeah. And I want to bring it back actually to what first made me aware of what you do, which is, to your point, I've been trying to kind of pull what you do more towards the audience and where I think they could apply it directly in business. But I don't want to ignore the obvious, which is part of what attracted me to your training. Is I'm a 56-year-old former accountant, right? And when I think about one of the big things that for me in my business and personal life balance is I love to travel. And when I think about the world as it is today, we see stuff in the news all the time that sometimes can be a little off-putting and a little scary and make me think, do I want to really travel to this, to go see a concert in this big venue? There's all these things going on. And I don't immediately think, oh, well, I need to become some security expert or learn how to fight or do all these crazy. No, I need to learn how to pay more attention, be more situationally aware, and avoid the bad situations.
Absolutely.
Right. And that's the initial thing that attracted me to all the things that you were talking about was, hey, with a little knowledge, a little change in your mindset, adding a few skills, a few more tools to put in your tool belt, that 80-20 rule, instead of trying to figure out how do I get myself out of a bunch of bad situations, How about I learn the skills to just avoid those things in the first place? And then all of the ancillary benefits that we get along the way, because of having those skills, they're forcing us to pay more attention to a lot more things along the way, looking with sort of a preventive mindset. But we get all these bonuses of realizing that, hey, I didn't realize that Sally was so stressed out today. But now I'm paying more attention because of the mindset I put myself in, and I'm getting all of these extra benefits for it. So
you've nailed it, John. It's, I call it stealth training. I don't call it, the academics, call it that too, stealth training. So when I've trained, let's say if I'm working specifically on disrupting threats, violence or whatnot, or workplace violence, I'm going to sit there and I'm going to throw 100 pounds of stuff at the wall, all these different observable indicators that could be a potential pre-event indicator, a left of bang indicator. So I'm throwing all these cues at you. But again, it ties back to discomfort and reactions in the brain. And what you just said, not only am I going to teach you how to be safe, avoid the situation, but you're going to teach you something that you're going to go home and you're going to see something happen within your family. And you're, wait a minute, that crazy Arab guy told me to look out for this, and I just saw it happen here. Or you're going to have a good interaction where you go, wait a minute, I think this person's not having a great day. They just said they were fine, but they don't look fine. So it's an old tracking analogy I like to use. It's like you've been driving around. Everyone does this stuff all day, every day, John. We're very attuned. We see nonverbal communication all day, every day, but most people don't analyze it. They don't actually observe for it. But it's like you've been driving around your whole life, and you're driving around in a neighborhood, you can't find the address you're trying to get to, but no one told you in this town, in this county, the street signs are only 1 inch off the ground. You've been looking around, driving around, looking up for street signs, and you can't find them until someone at the gas station said, oh man, in this county, they're only an inch off the ground. And he took your head and said, look, once he took your head and showed you that, you couldn't unsee it. You were never lost again. You didn't need that person holding your hand for the rest of your life. But once they gave you the mindset we talked about, and they showed you the indicators, the light bulb moment goes on, and it just has application throughout a whole bunch of things, whether it be sales, M&A, business meetings, nonverbal, keeping your family safe on travel, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, the whole point of this is to avoid bang. I'm not training Rambos out here. My best student stories, when they come back, and they always come back and they say, hey, because your training A, B, and C didn't happen. They're telling me the story. They're going, yeah, and then this happened. And I go, yeah, then what? And they get to like the punchline of the story. And they're like, well, I don't know what happened after that, because I grabbed my wife and I got the heck out of there. It's like, boom, that's a good day. That's a good day in my book, when we can completely avoid that situation, whether it be a threat to your life or some type of business situation where you want to avoid that bang situation.
Yeah, and I've heard you say before, if you could hypothetically put a number on it and say you could make somebody 20% more effective, 30, whatever the number is, forget about all that. What if you just improved by 1%, and that 1%, all it did was it saved you a really bad outcome in a business meeting? Or it saved you from getting into a really uncomfortable situation. It doesn't take a giant leap forward in skills and mindset to get a pretty big, again, talking my audience is finance and accounting people. They're thinking about what kind of return am I getting on the investment that I'm putting into this stuff. It's pretty, I've seen it myself in little things on a day-to-day basis, in just conversations and observations, where I've noticed something, and it literally was just the stuff that you've been talking about, just in this short conversation: mindset, paying attention to things, thinking about the context, baseline, deviation, comfort, just all these things. And I've heard you talk about little exercises that you've recommended, of like doing little observations. I've done those without being conscious of it, where I'll be out
your light bulb
shopping
got turned on. You
Yes,
didn't need me there. You heard it one time. And
Yep.
you didn't need me there to hold your hand after you'd heard it. Exactly.
Yep. That reminds me, tell the audience that the course that I'm going through of yours, the S.A.F.E Observer program. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I just started going through it, and it's already those light bulb, every video that I'm watching, I'm getting light bulbs turned on.
Sure. Yeah. You're going to get hammered with a lot of information. S.A.F Observer course. That's what my courses are called. They start with S.A.F. I have the S.A.F Observer course, and I have the S.A.F Instructor course, which is the next step up if you actually want to teach you skills to your business or your community. But the S.A.F part stands for Situational Awareness for Employees. Okay, so that's why I built it, is to give people a leg up with all the violence happening with workplace violence. The Safe Observer you're going through, John, is built into 3 modules, where the first part is we give you the mindset, we give you the things that are happening in the brain, the dopamine, basically all the academics. But then the second and third module is, all right, cool, I got the academic part. How do I apply this to my everyday life? I'm a cop, I'm in the military, I'm an M&A accountant, whatever it is, whatever walk in life you come from, this is going to give you a big crash course in taking in the information around you and analyzing it, actually analyzing the information and making better quality decisions. I think your eye takes in 7 quadrillion bits of information a second, but most of that stuff, 99% of it's jettisoned. And you don't want to take in and analyze every bit of information. But like you said, if I can give you 1, 2, 5%, 10% better quality information coming in your life, no matter your walk life, you're going to make better decisions quicker with that information.
Yeah, I've heard several people actually say our brain is like a deletion machine.
Yes, absolutely.
We're getting so much information that one of its primary functions is to figure out, all right, what do we need to ignore? Because otherwise we're just going to be overwhelmed.
You lose it. Yeah.
Great. So what is the best way for people to reach out and get in touch with you if they wanted to? Now you do training. The course you were talking about is a recorded course
Online.
But you do training where you actually go in and do like hands-on face-to-face training in organizations, right?
Absolutely. We do the Safe Observer course, which is online. And that's just basically for everybody. Safe Instructor, if you want to come in and learn it and teach it to organizations or your community or your churches, that's also an online training portal. And basically, the final step or a different step would be me coming in and doing a group training session. So, I'd come into a large group session. I've done this with Netflix, Coachella, whatever it is. It might be for security, it might just be for every employees or just or C-suite. There's always a lot of information they glean from it. So those are the options. And the best place to get a hold of me is just go through the website, www.emergencedisrupt.com. I'm on all channels of social media. I'm on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all of them, stuff I don't even know about anymore. So put me in any social media and you'll find me out there, but that's the best place to go in there and book or reserve a course from there.
Awesome. Well, I want to respect your time. We're about at the top of the hour. I want to thank you for sharing so much in a short period of time. I know it's kind of hard to condense so much of your experience, but I think you did a great job of giving us a few nuggets. I love the acronyms. The accounting and finance folks live on those things. Everything we do is an acronym. Check them out in social media. Get that course. I don't remember when I started it, but I've gone through it. I've gone back through and repeated some of the things, not because they're complicated at all, but because I wanted that reinforcement, because they're so
immersion
practical. Yes, they're very, very practical. Any last words for the audience, or just have them reach out to you?
Just have them reach out on social. And again, there's this application started with threat detection, but this has application in the C-suite, for managers, for business, for sales, for M&A, anywhere where you're interacting with people. If you're interacting with people and you want to take in better information and make better quality decisions, this can absolutely help you. Oh, by the way, it can help you stay safe when you're out there with your loved ones, with your family, with your traveling and whatnot. So it's a really great skill to lead, and you only need to hear it once. But John, I want to say thank you for inviting me on here. It's been a pleasure to try to think of these in your context. So it's been great. And I really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you. Thanks a lot for your time. Guys, tune in next time and make sure you watch this, rewatch it, and take notes when this comes out. We'll see you guys next time.